Hello, everybody. I'm Stephanie.
And I'm Georgiana.
And this is Wholehearted Loving, where we teach you simple tools for self-love and compassion to grow the muscles you need to be with big feelings, triggers, and overwhelming sensations in your body.
Whether you have active challenges in your life or relationships, or whether you're just here to learn to be kinder to yourself, we pull out all the little things that make life feel better, the things that give you a sense of hope and direction.
So if you're too hard on yourself or on others,
if you want to feel real, deep connection in your life and relationships,
even if you want to reprogram your inner critic while you're sleeping,
this is a great place to be.
So welcome, and we hope this episode brings you just the tidbit you needed today.
Enjoy the show.
Hello, everybody. Today we're going to be talking about self-imposed burdens. We've been talking a lot in the last couple of weeks about gifts and burdens and ways through sharing those, having hard conversations. But today we're going to talk about self-imposed burdens, which perhaps you can tell by the title are optional. Hooray! And as always, you can find self-reflection prompts for this episode and every episode on our Instagram at Wholehearted Loving. And you can learn more about us and how to practice with us live on our website at wholeheartedloving.com. Before we begin, we will do a self-connection practice to connect with ourselves before we connect with each other in this podcast.
Yay, yay. Okay. I realized I did not think of one beforehand, but one came to me, so we'll just go with that.
Perfect.
How's that? Okay. It's going to have a little essence of wiggling.
Oh, I was already wiggling. That's perfect.
Yeah. So let's feel your butt on the seat or your feet on the floor. It's going to be a little harder if you're laying down, but maybe you could find your own version of this if you're laying down. So it might not seem like wiggling at first. We're just going to roll the right shoulder like up and then back, like just roll it. And then alternate with the left shoulder. But then you're going to how do you describe that?
I feel like a snake. I don't know. What are you doing? Well, you're rolling one shoulder after the other, and then you are wiggling.
Yeah. And so I'm just alternating rolling my right shoulder and my left shoulder. And naturally, my body wants to do a twist or like a bit of twist, right? That's just what's happening in my body. This is like a
70s dance.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's do that. And then we can switch it up and go the other way.
Oh, very 70s dance.
So now we're rolling our shoulders forward, alternating right and left side. But I wanted to add, now you can pause and maybe just feel how that feels. But notice how it feels to go really slowly or to go faster. Or what happens when the circles you make are small or large.
Little ones are funny.
Little ones are wiggly. Don't you find?
Very wiggly.
So when you do little ones, I see that your head wobbles like a bobblehead.
Yep. And then big ones are dramatically amusing, especially if you do them really fast.
Oh my God. So we're connected to our bodies. We're also, I think, just naturally that connects you to play and silliness. And what I'm noticing is maybe you would feel just as silly and playful doing it yourself, but it's nice to do it with someone.
It is.
And it just elicits laughs.
Yeah. And it's nice to have something to do. I'm the kind of person who likes being put to work. I like to know what's happening, And if you were to sit me down and say, look, Steph, right now we're going to make some shoulder circles. I'd be like, great, let's do that. And then we'd be having a hoot in an instant. You can do that with anyone anytime.
I'm thinking, I don't feel mad or sad right now, but I'm thinking it might be hard to stay that mad doing something like this.
Yes.
So what I'm noticing, like I started pretty like neutral and content when I started this practice just now. And it shifted me into like even lighter mood, more playful. And so I like to just highlight that we have the ability to shift our state in a very little, my words are gone, in a very little amount of time. Does that even make sense? In a short period of time. And I also like that it costs you nothing and you can do it anywhere.
Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. I just had
this is exactly the kind of thing that I would like to introduce into difficult conversations or like heavy periods. So, and in agreement with the person I'm working with or having the conversation with. And I think it's so easy to set up these expectations and then to be connected throughout. So if you know you're about to have like, I don't know, let's say we have a whole house we have to clean together for 4 hours, or we have to talk about a bunch of heavy things to do with work or something like that. You can be like, look, we know this is going to be heavy or boring or make our bodies sore or whatever it is. Could we agree in advance that every hour on the hour we'll set a reminder and then we will make shoulder circles together?
Nice.
Great.
The image that I had listening to you talk was, let's play Ring Around the Rosie.
Oh, great. Yeah.
So you'd have some physical touch. You'd be moving around. I mean, I don't know if any of us have really horrible memories of Ring Around the Rosie, but for me, it just elicits some silly playfulness. Skipping around in a circle together.
You don't know it's about plague death, eh?
Yeah, I that's one of my gifts is I don't hear all the lyrics of things.
Oh, that's good.
So I give it my own meaning. But what I mean by that is like, imagine if you did something short and playful before these things you're talking about, a big task, a challenging task, a hard or long conversation. And we might maybe do a separate episode on this, but when we do our group calls, when we do anything, we always start with a body practice. And one of the things that we ask people to pause with at the beginning of our calls sometimes, other than noticing how it feels for them to do the practice, we ask them like, what is it like to know that everybody here on this call is committed to taking time for themselves, to take care of themselves before they engage with you in this conversation? Right? And people are like, oh, wow. Like, that's pretty cool. That's pretty special. And we would pose the question, imagine if this was the norm in workplaces before meetings, whether it's a big group and team meeting or just like a meeting with one person, or you're working on a project together, or you're about to, you're seeing your friend and you want to connect, but you just find a moment to just find your own connection with self first, whether it's in a serious way or a playful way. And maybe you even find a way to connect with each other on a lighter way before you dive into something big and deep and heavy. Yeah. What that does, it builds more capacity. It builds you like a little buffer to take into whatever you're about to do, to get to draw from.
And it's something transcendent, right? It's that there's something bigger than whatever is happening right now, whether it's we're also connected to play and fun with each other, even while we're doing a big hard thing, or we're all committed to some bigger picture thing. And we know that this bit that we're doing right now, this meeting or this house cleaning or whatever, is not the whole picture.
Yeah. I like it.
Me too. And I liked those shoulder wiggles. That was fun.
Yeah.
Okay, so and I think that's a good segue into self-imposed burdens. Like, not to be flippant, but it's a bit of a burden to never do shoulder circles.
Well, I was going to say this, and this seems fitting now. There was a time in my life where I think moving my body, like even doing shoulder circles, and there's nothing wrong with this, but I would have noticed I would have been very awkward and rigid.
Right.
And we've had people on the call say, like, I feel so uncomfortable. They realize they've held their bodies with such tension that they really feel awkward and rigid and not free in movement and expression. And they know how that parallels and shows up in their life in other ways. It's not just about, I feel weird rolling my shoulders. They know that they show up in life more constricted, more reserved, more held back. And I was like that before. And I remember maybe it was a couple years ago, I was at a yoga nidra class with sound healing or something. And there was some free intuitive movement moments, and I was just doing my thing and feeling my body and flowing. And afterwards, the instructor said to me, oh, like, hey, like, did you enjoy that? And I said, oh, I loved it. I had a great time. And she's like, oh, I was watching you. You must be a dancer. And I just laughed. I said, I don't know what you're talking about. She's like, oh, you seem to really like be in flow, and like there's a suppleness to your movement and an ease. And I thanked her because she saw in me that transformation. Like she saw that not end point, but where I had come to by then being in her class. I said, no, actually, I've always felt very rigid and uncomfortable when it comes to movement and dance. I feel like I have no coordination, no rhythm, no nothing. And she's like, well, you really look like you're a dancer. I was like, oh, okay. And she's like, she's also said, you look really happy. Right. And that would have never been the state that I would have associated with movement in the past. So I just wanted to say that if you do see yourself, you experience feeling awkward in your body in movement, you feel rigid or tight or tense or nervous to move in different ways or to be seen moving in different ways around people, that it can shift. If you're open and willing to just playing with it, that rigidity goes away over time. It melts away, right? Yeah. So I just really want to encourage you to keep playing.
Yeah, totally. That's a really big self-imposed burden, not being comfortable moving, listening to the body, moving the way the body's wanting to move. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a big one.
Yeah. And we've talked to lots of people who realize, hey, I realized that my rigidity and movement, like I don't even I feel uncomfortable. Right now I'm just reaching my arms up high, to the side, down low. And I remember in our women's group where we had intuitive movement, and I was like, oh, Jesus.
Oh my God. Yeah. Did not look forward to that day.
And I see it now for other women who are sort of just in that sort of discovery phase of their lives, where the idea of just reaching your arms like up high, down low, to the side, and like that feels scary and awkward. And we connect that to, what is your relationship like with taking up space in a room, taking up space in a relationship? Right? Using your voice. And people typically make that connection. Oh, I don't like to take up space. It feels scary to take up space. I was taught that it wasn't safe to take up space. So even a simple practice of rolling the shoulders is that beginning of, I'm starting to take up space. I'm taking up more room, right? Just by moving like front and back a little in this alternating of the shoulder rolls, I'm taking up more space than if I were to stay still.
Right.
Right. So it's just a nice way, symbolic way of becoming more and more comfortable taking up more literal space.
Yeah. I remember that's interesting because I'm quite comfortable taking up space. And I was even then when I was not looking forward to intuitive movement day. And I'm good at doing what I'm told. Move this way, move that way, no problem. I can copy somebody who's dancing. I can remember the steps. But when it came to self-expression, I was uncomfortable. I'm happy expressing things, just not self. That was a block at that point. And
can you help us get that a little clearer? What do you mean by I'm good at expressing things, but not self?
Ideas, things I'm confident about. I'm also good at representing like the unspoken things, happy to do that, happy to take up that space. But if it's like, oh, what way does my body want to move? How am I feeling? That's always been very repressed on my behalf. So it became a danger zone, you know?
Right. So could we link that to a burden you've put upon yourself over the years? So if we were to use the prompt, a burden that I've put upon myself in the past is.
Yeah. How do I frame that one specifically as a burden? Because it just felt like a thing you don't do. I didn't feel burdened by that. I felt limited in a way that I wasn't aware I was limited, you know?
So this is great. So sometimes we're going to notice in the moment something feels like a burden. I'm doing it to myself. It feels like a burden. And other times we won't recognize it, won't register as a burden. Right now, I guess what might be an appropriate fitting question is, in hindsight, what was the burden that you put upon yourself? If you look at that example.
It was a restriction. So I didn't feel the freedom to move the way I wanted to. I felt that I would be judged or ridiculed or told I was wrong in some way. So the burden is like lack of movement, lack of self-trust. Yeah, it's a real feeling of not freedom.
Yeah, it sounds like a burden to behave in a way I think people expect or want me to.
Yes, and move in like pre-approved ways, I want to say.
Yeah. And so over the years, what have you noticed you've given yourself more permission to like do or feel or be when it relates to this piece?
It's funny because it didn't start out as permission. It started out as forcing because I wanted to be different than I was.
Forcing because you wanted to be different than you were, like, because it was like, I want to fit into another mold, or I want more freedom for myself, so I'm willing to lean into something uncomfortable and try it.
The second one, for sure.
Right.
But even that was, you're friendlier about it than I was to myself. You know, it was like, well, if you want to feel comfortable moving, you better goddamn move. And you're going to practice this or else.
So there's a different burden that it transitioned into.
And it was hard. It was deep. It was even an embarrassment doing it by myself, alone in an empty house, you know?
Okay, we got to stop at that. That is such a good thing to pull out. It was even an embarrassment doing it by myself, alone in my own house. Tell us about that. What do you mean?
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, talk about resistance and the stories that would come up. Like, I remember standing in my kitchen, trying just to move intuitively to this song that I liked. And it's like I'm putting on a show for an audience that does not exist. And part of my inner narrative would be like, oh, what if like there's hidden cameras around and like someone's broadcasting this somewhere? Like just resistance festival in my mind. What if somebody walks in? What if the neighbors are spying with binoculars? What if I'm stupid and bad and wrong and look ridiculous? And all of these thoughts.
Right. Yeah.
That I didn't have a compassionate path through, that I only had, too bad, you're doing it. You know? Very different than the ways that I have learned to be.
What have you learned to be now? What is there more permission for? Whether you explicitly gave it to yourself over the years, what do you notice now there's more freedom to do or be or feel?
Well, there's not a lot of shoulds. There's a lot more freedom to just be and feel whatever's coming up. So in the past, if I felt like I don't want to move right now, but I should because it's moving time. Now it would be like, oh, I don't feel like moving right now. Period. End of sentence, you know? One of the things that was so helpful for me in that intuitive movement day at women's group was, I think it was Heather, who was one of the women leading it at that point. She was like, your body is telling you to do something. It might be telling you to sit down and not move, but also you might feel like a stretch. Like, is there a part of your body that wants to stretch? And that resonated with me hugely. I'm like, oh, there's almost always a part of my body that wants to stretch. And you could do that in a musical, flowy sort of way, maybe. But that really opened up something for me, almost because there's a practical element, you know?
Right. Yeah.
Yes. So now another thing also that's changed, this absolutist mentality I've got is really strong. It'd be like, well, if you're comfortable intuitively moving, perhaps now by yourself in the kitchen or in women's group where we've all got permission to do that. My mental narrative in the past would have been like, well, if you're comfortable, then you're comfortable, and you got to be comfortable anywhere, anytime. And that's all there is to it. And now I'm like, oh, actually, there's probably venues and people among whom I feel more comfortable moving intuitively, and all of that is okay as well, you know? So like some discernment, some, genuinely feeling what's true and acting on it and letting all of that be okay, no matter what mood I'm in.
So you're saying you trust yourself that if you don't feel like movement, you won't move? Do you just know that there'll also come a moment that you do want to move?
Yes. Yeah. And I've always, that was an interesting part, even with the, whatever I had before, the force and fear of movement. There were always times where I would be seized by dance. And like, I'd go to a nightclub and it would just be like, I wouldn't go out with the feeling, oh, I must dance. I must go to a nightclub. They'd be like, I'm at a nightclub. Oh, seized by the need to dance. And then I'll just go off in my own world and dance feverishly for hours alone in a bubble. And that always happened. I didn't really think of that as intuitive movement or something I was doing. It was more like something that was happening to me and I was happily participating in.
Yes. I want to chat about this. So recently in a group, when we started our body connection practice, we asked people, just notice what your body is telling you, what it might want, what it might need. Some people might know immediately what their body wants and needs, and other people might have no clue. And we also want to normalize that. It's okay to not know. And so we offer some questions just to spark something, perhaps. And one of the questions is, would you like to sit? Would you like to stand? Or would you like to lay down? And it sounds like a ridiculous question. Why are we spending time on this question? And it made such a difference for people. Some people noticed I actually never check in with myself to see what I would prefer.
Right.
Or I grew up never having permission to choose what I wanted. Right. And so it was big for these people to start asking themselves, just practice asking themselves that simple question. Do I want to sit? Do I want to lay down? Do I want to stand up? And I want to tie this to what you just said, in that a lot of times we sit, stand up, and lay down. Like, we do it all the time. The thing that's different is we don't pause and really notice what our body's asking for, what it really would love, what it would really feel good for it. And then register, oh, my body's really saying, I'd love to sit down. So let's sit down. And then once I sit down, can I enjoy the sitting down that my body told me I wanted and that I honored? Can I make a moment of that and register that I'm honoring my body right now?
Yeah.
Instead of mindlessly, like, we sit down all the time. Why are we sitting down? Right? Is it just habit? Is it because you actually feel that pull of your body to sit down, but you haven't quite registered and tracked that's what's happening? That is so valuable, tracking that that's what's happening. because once you get that, you're going to be able to track so many things that are happening for yourself. You're going to have much easier interactions with people because you can track what's happening.
Totally. And all of those things not doing what your body wants are all tiny self-imposed burdens. I'm thinking about a woman I know the other day. Everybody was sitting around and she was standing, and somebody said, "Oh, sit down." And she was like, "Oh no, my back, did something to my back, feels more comfortable to stand." It takes an injury to notice, I feel more comfortable standing, but you might anytime. And not doing that is a tiny self-imposed burden, just unconscious tiny burdens.
Tiny burdens. Yeah. So we wanted to talk about self-imposed burdens, just to recognize that, sometimes we're receiving burdens from other people. And also often we put burdens upon ourselves that are not necessary. And part of learning to shift that with compassion is to recognize them with compassion. And you might notice, hey, I'm burdening myself right in this moment today by thinking I should XYZ, or I shouldn't XYZ. Or you might, maybe that doesn't resonate that much, but maybe you can look back and say, oh, I have really burdened myself in the past with this should, with this expectation. And so we wanted to give you an opportunity to practice not just owning that burden you've put upon yourself, but noticing how it feels in the body to recognize that we've put that burden upon ourselves. Right. Yeah. And then shifting towards, what kind of freedom do you want to offer yourself? What kind of permission do you want to give yourself to try it a different way? Right. So, is it fun if we just sort of sit with that prompt and share a few of our own?
Yeah, I made a tiny list.
Okay. Do you want to go first? Do you want me to go? Do you want alternate?
Sure, I can go. One of the things is that I'm quite a solo operator. Like I'm alone at the moment. I live alone. There's housemates in a separate part of the house, but I'm mostly on my own. And I think I probably have been in positions in the past where I've sort of had to deal with everything. So it's just natural for me to think that I have to do everything and deal with everything, right? And I know now that that's not true. And I can notice now when I'm getting bitter about the things I need to do. And that's a cue to go, hey, world, I need something, or something like that. And it reminded me of the way my birthday rolled out, with you wanting to organize, but not having time or space to organize. So just putting it out to the world, right? So one of the things that I've learned to do is just to say out loud, or in writing in a group chat or whatever, like, here's what's going on with me. Here is what would feel great to me. And let the universe respond, right? Like if I start noticing that I'm feeling put upon by whatever thing I feel I need to be doing all by myself, if I just announce to anyone, gosh, I'm feeling overwhelmed about this thing that I'm doing right now, 9 times out of 10, the universe responds with a solution that never would have arisen if I hadn't said the thing out loud, This
is a neat thing to track, your birthday. Because if I'm getting it right, you're saying you didn't want to burden yourself with the planning and organizing of your birthday. Is that right?
Yes.
So I think when I asked you, maybe, hey, what's up for your birthday? Do you want to plan it? Do you not? You took that opportunity to say, I don't want the burden of that. So you said, I don't remember exactly what you said, but something like, do you want to plan it? Or do you remember what you said?
I said I would love to plan nothing and make no decisions.
Great. Yeah. And so I took that. And so, Steph, I feel like you passed me this ball that I then held for a moment, or, felt into, do I want to hold this? How long? How big? And I thought, well, I love Steph. she does such a great job planning for my birthday. Like, I want to return, love. And even if you didn't plan my birthday for me, I would want to do something nice for you for your birthday. And so I said, great. That's clear. You don't want that burden, right? And like, maybe I didn't phrase it that way in my mind, but energetically I felt that you don't want that on your plate, right? And so I was happy to hold it. And then I sat with that. And I was like, wow, I don't want to plan this thing all by myself either. And in the past, because I also grew up like, I don't know if isolated was the word. I felt like I had to figure everything out myself. I was very independent from a very young age, and I was very competent and capable. And I always figured it out, and it always turned out well. So I have an old autopilot pattern of course I can take care of it. And of course I can do it. And that in this moment lasted like a nanosecond. I already knew, like, everything in the body was like, there's no part of you that wants to do this on your own, right? It won't feel good. So, and I knew I could say yes to you. No worries, Steph. You won't have to think or plan anything. But I knew that I'm not taking on that burden to make it all mine. So I got on the group chats with our other friends and said, hey, like, have you thought about Steph's birthday and whatever? And all of a sudden, all these people started coming in. I can do this. I'm happy to do this. I'll provide this. And it felt so nice to feel that I was a part of creating a special day for you, and that I didn't have to have it all on me.
Yeah.
And that I did that for myself, right? That I didn't sit there with, I've got to do it all. And that would have been a burden I would have placed upon myself in the past.
Totally. And this is somewhere where our physical cues are so important, and why we do all of this body-based self-connection stuff that seems so tiny and ridiculous. It's because in those moments, like, I know if I'm deluged with request and my response is to go, ooh, it is too much and I need help. The moment I have that feeling, where in the past, it would have been like, okay, now I've got to do all this stuff. I better make a list. I better let everybody know. I have to stay on top of this. I have to stay on top of that. I have to arrange whatever. This is an excess that I do not desire. And I think it's so common for people to take that on and then become like drill sergeants for the whole operation. And it really generates this like control freak energy that just doesn't feel good.
Yeah, because the burden is on me now. The responsibility is on me. So I've got to make it work and make it good. And so now I've got to micromanage everybody and make sure that this all works out, right? So I don't know if you're listening, whether you're watching us or you're just listening, but I want to tell you what I just saw with Steph. When you're saying, when you're sort of flooded with something, you're already busy and there's a big thing incoming. You're like, whoa, that's a lot. There was this like leaning back, like, whoa, like this heaviness. That's a lot. Let me just feel that for a moment. And based on that body information, make the next choice. But if we don't know how to grow that pause, and we haven't come into relationship with our body and listening yet, we're going to miss that piece. That piece won't exist because we go so quickly. The next thing I saw when you're describing it, you lean forward, your eyes got wide and your face got like tight. And there was this energy in me. We got to do this. We got to do that. We got to, and I think anyone that's listening knows that energy. You recognize that energy and that state.
Yeah.
And we really want to encourage you to practice noticing what is before that.
Yeah.
And you might be like, what do you mean? What is before that? Nothing is before that. And it's okay if you think that right now. Then I would encourage you to go back to the like extreme basics that we always start with people is, can you feel your feet on the ground when you walk? And that's going to start making the difference so that you can notice what is the thing before we go into the fight energy, the work energy, the make it happen energy.
Yeah.
There's something before that.
There certainly is, yeah. And I'll draw our attention back to the nervous system state of where if you're faced with an eye roll from somebody, you're going to lose it. Like,
Yes.
that's a really useful cue.
That's a definite nervous system state.
For sure. And so that's where it's like, yeah, or I think comparatively, if any wrench is thrown in the gears. So if at any point your rigid plan you're creating because you're overwhelmed gets interrupted or slowed down, are you going to be fine with that, or are you going to freak out? You know, that's a good sign that maybe there's a bit of overwhelm happening. And I want to remind everyone that there are plenty of times in life where we will have to be overwhelmed. These are optional times when we don't have to be overwhelmed. So I really believe that we have like pockets of energy designated for certain things in life. And we have enough energy to cope with these things when they come, and we can't have any effect on it when it has to be this overwhelming situation that we deal with. And I'm not open to optional overwhelm. Yeah.
Yes. Right. So optional overwhelm, will give you an example. One of the burdens that I placed upon myself in the past was the burden to keep everybody happy.
Ouch.
Right. And I'm just taking my time with that and maybe saying it again. A burden I placed upon myself in the past was to keep everybody happy. And I'm just feeling how that feels in my body to acknowledge that. Right? There's some warm tingly in my solar plexus. There's a little softening in my face that like I connect to like a little bit of like sadness for myself. Right? That's a big burden to try to keep everybody happy. And over the years, I've been practicing how to give myself permission to not take on that burden, not put that burden upon myself. It was a burden I feel like I received in childhood. But at some point, we're not children anymore. At some point, we're grown adults who have the right to choose, the availability to choose. We might not recognize there's choice moments. That was another hard thing for me, recognizing that there's choice moments. But seeing that, oh, I now place that burden upon myself. No one else is placing. They might expect it now from me. That's different. But I'm still continuing to place that burden upon myself. And so when I learned it was okay to disappoint people, and that it was okay if people were unhappy with what made me happy or what felt good for me or what I needed, that was lifting some of that burden. Right? I've also had burdens of like, I want to call this silly, but it's not silly. It was really real for me. I would burden myself with, I got to lose 10 pounds before that wedding so that I can fit into that dress. And so then every morning I would wake up. Did I lose weight? Did I not? Am I going to fit in the dress? Is the dress still too tight? And all through the day, be thinking about what should I eat? What shouldn't I eat? And why? For what? Like all that extra stress and burden I placed upon myself. Like now I'm like, I'm not going to fit in that dress. Get a different dress. Alter the dress.
Oh, alter. So I'm like, is it not a burden to have to go buy a dress, or is that fun for you?
Well, this is what's interesting, because I think different things feel like burdens for different people, and that's important to recognize, right? For someone else, it might be like, well, then I'll just go on a diet for the next 2 weeks and fit into that dress.
And I'd be like, oh, don't eat that because I don't want to go shopping.
Right. Whereas I know that for me, like the idea, if I were to close my eyes and imagine the next 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks in preparation for this event, I need to really be on myself to not eat whatever. I know the amount of stress that will course through my body. I know it will be my first waking thought, and it will be like sprinkled throughout my day until I go to bed. And then tomorrow will be the exact same. And so for me, getting something altered or finding something new. When I think about that, I'm like, oh, yeah, let's do that. That feels much better.
That's a great thing to notice.
Mm-hmm.
Again, with the body-based self-connection, right? To be able to notice that feels good, that doesn't feel as good.
Yes. And so sometimes you're not going to know because you don't have enough data yet. You haven't done the new thing enough to know that it might feel good or feel better. This is where imagination is amazing. Imagine, right? So for me, I like to imagine, what will it be like if I want to make myself lose this weight in 2, 3, 4 weeks, whatever. And what will it feel like to maybe still be very intentional and conscious about what I'm eating just to feel good in my body. But like, there's not this pressure and rigidity and this burden of, if I don't, then I'm bad or whatever. I have the option.
Yeah.
To also get a different dress, borrow a dress, alter a dress. Don't wear a dress. I don't know. Wear something else that fits and is comfortable. And to notice, like to imagine that, and then notice, does that cause that sigh, that sinking in? Does it cause an opening and an expansiveness? Does it bring a softening or a lightness? Right? Noticing when you imagine two options, what happens in the body.
Yeah. There's something in here of, if it's hysterical, it's historical coming up for me. Of like the subtle difference between or else and like there are natural consequences. Something will follow from this is a very different vibe to me than this, that, or else, you know?
Yeah.
And that's the kind of feeling when I've got a burden, when I'm forcing something.
Yeah. So recognizing how a burden feels for you in the body, right? Yeah. And again, recognizing that what one person feels as a burden might not feel like a burden for you, and vice versa. Also, what felt like a burden for me last week might not feel like a burden for me today. Or what feels like a burden this morning might not feel like a burden in the afternoon. It's going to change, or it can change, right? So noticing that. Other burdens. This is self-imposed on so many levels that I start to giggle when I realize like how hard I make my life. And this is what burdens are about. It's about they make your life harder when it's not necessary, right? So one of the burdens that historically I have put upon myself is when I have a trip to go on, I'm like packing at 3 a.m. the night before. Like that's just the autopilot pattern. And as I've come into my body more and felt that connection more and know what it feels like at 3 a.m. to feel exhausted and like no clarity of mind and like annoyed to be packing and then leaving on a trip the next day super exhausted. I'm like, do I really need to do that to myself again? Some more? And sometimes it still just works out that way. But what I can say is I'm a lot more aware of, I don't want to burden myself with that feeling of rushing and of being tired and of sort of like panic energy of, oh my God, did I forget something? And I would love to gift myself, right? Gift myself the experience of spaciousness and rest and calm. And so for me, it's about, well, then can I start earlier? Right. And I know it's always been a simple question of why not just start earlier? But like, there's some strong resistance in me that says, nope, I don't need to do it now. That bag doesn't even have to be packed yet. And so just on a logical level, it didn't work for me. If things work on a logical level for you, fantastic. And many things work on a logical level for me, but some things I just get tripped up. It just doesn't work that way, or it doesn't work that way when my old programming is so strong still.
Mm.
And so in those times, it's nice for me to get to plug into a different information source, which is body-based.
Yeah.
Just, do I enjoy that feeling of 3 a.m. packing? What would feel better? Like, how would it feel to get to crawl into bed at like 10 o'clock the night before and know that everything's already taken care of? Right? When I imagine that, I'm like, right? And so I've been learning and practicing like how to help my future self out and be a little kinder and to not burden myself with having to rush. Big theme of my life that I still work on.
And you're a busy lady.
I'm a busy lady. Lady. Yeah.
I've got one that I think will probably be its own episode, but I also think we've given a lot of useful examples here and people can extrapolate. But I'll just say the burden of thinking we know what other people think and like and find attractive.
Say more, please.
Well, it's so subjective and we just have no idea. I mean, I remember at some point realizing that like attraction is subjective. And I think at some point I thought, oh, hot people won't find me hot. What do any of these words mean, first of all? All completely subjective. And then just not being able, like remember when I was 15 or 16, the guy that everybody thought was like the hottest guy in our class liked me, and I just couldn't compute. Like I was like, I don't understand what you're talking about.
You don't understand that he liked you, or you don't understand what everyone saw in him?
No, I understood what everybody saw in him. He was really hot. And I didn't understand how he could be attracted to me because I had a burdensome thought of deciding in advance what he would find attractive. So many micro burdens going on there, deciding what other people think. I mean, so much of our life unfolds from that. And to be present in the body in the moment is the only way we're going to actually know what anybody's thinking and feeling, which again is subjective, totally changeable moment to moment. Like there's no way to write a script about that, but we're constantly burdened. And to some extent that's useful because we need to get by in the world and pattern recognition is important, but it's not always true. And to be able to pause and be with what's actually happening instead of our pre-recorded script is liberating.
Yeah, this is all about noticing the old script and noticing whether the old script is still serving you. How does it feel in your body to live by your old script? And do you feel an opening to want to explore either some revisions to your old script or a completely new script? I feel like that's what we've been doing for years and years now, is really looking at different pieces of the script and tweaking things. Yeah. Noticing what feels good and what doesn't feel good. Like an old burden I had was nobody's allowed in the house until I clean it perfectly.
Ah, that's a good one.
Right? And so I think I would have lost out on so much social connection and fun because I burdened myself with like the house has to be like spotless to allow people in. Right. And then over time, with the help of really lovely people, realizing that's not true. And also noticing for myself, like, I don't care when I go to friends' houses. Like if it feels and looks lived in, it feels good actually, right? Mm-hmm. It's also very permission giving. And I remember a friend of mine, Michelle, we had just met actually when our kids were in preschool. And she sent me this picture of her kitchen one day, like unprompted. And there was like just crap everywhere, like a kitchen looks when you cooked and, were tired and didn't have time to clean up and you got kids going on and whatever. And she just texted it and said, I hope this makes you feel better about your day or your life or whatever she said. And I was like, oh my God, I love this lady.
That's sweet.
And it was like so good to have, like, to be able to rewrite that old script.
Yeah.
Nobody cares. Well, some people will care, but the people, who want to be around you, they won't care. There will be people who don't care.
Yeah.
Right. And they just want to be around you and be in your space and feel your energy and connect with you. And so it's felt really good to lift that burden.
Mm-hmm.
And now it feels good to, if I'm going to tidy, I'm doing it for me and how I want to feel in it.
Yeah, totally.
And that was never a thing. It was always, you tidy for other people and their expectations.
Right. That's a really important distinction.
Their expectations were.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Like, how many of us don't actually know how we want to be living and what we want our space to be, because we're so focused on what we think other people need of it, And I want to say one more thing about this too. We've got a friend who's a little bit hoardish. And I remember we were getting closer and closer years ago, but she wouldn't let me come to her house. And she was open about it. And I was like, I feel offended because, like, what do you imagine that I think? Like, I don't care about your mess. Let me in, let me be close to you. That's the thing that matters. And of course, there are other people who would walk into that space and be like, oh, well, you need to do this, you need to do that, and this should be different, and that should be different. And like, all of these types of people will exist. Yes. And the point is to be in your body enough to notice what's true for you, how to discern how and with whom to share, and letting like all of that be okay,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, like, there's something special about friends letting us see their real selves. Right. And I feel like it just creates a closeness that you can't quite have in the same way when we're putting up masks and facades and hiding parts of our lives we don't want people to see, or we think that we'll be judged for.
Yeah.
Right.
Totally.
I found it so powerful in those years where we really learned to expose our minds and to be able to say to someone, to a friend or a new friend, like, I'm worried that you're going to judge me for XYZ. And like, it was always, I've never had that met with anything horrible.
Mm. Yeah.
Like, it was always like, I don't really care.
Totally.
And so imagine all the things we put upon ourselves as burdens that most people really don't care.
That's true. Yeah. There's some interesting layers here because this is like a multi-level burden where if like an anxious, clean freak sort of person was going to come over and I was feeling like, oh, I need to clean. In the past, I would have probably taken on that burden, but now I would probably shift that. I would notice like, oh, here's the way I'm feeling. And instead of holding that knowledge itself as a burden, I would expose it. Like, actually, I don't want you to come over right now because I know you're going to judge me, or I know you're going to want things in my home to be different than they are. Georgiana can come over. I know she's not going to feel those ways. So, my house is welcome and open to people who are open and welcome being there, but it will not be open to, the other thing.
This is interesting, and I feel like this is a different episode altogether, is sometimes when people don't recognize the burdens they bring in
Yes.
and place upon people. And because of that, like you said, there's a cause and effect.
Yeah.
Right. So I would have been welcomed into your home, and this other person might not have felt so welcome or invited into your home. They might have actually heard from you, I don't want you to come. And it's easy to think, well, what's wrong with me? Why does she get to come and I don't get to come? And if we're willing to have some self-compassionate ownership of, what kind of energy and expectation do I bring forth to people? Is it possible that that's not pleasant for them? And because of that, I'm not getting access to them.
Yes.
Right. I remember my mom once asked me, like, why don't you ever tell me what's going on with your life? And part of me just felt like, yes, that's true. Like there was a little bit of tiny bit of sadness there because I wanted my truest self wants to share more with her. There was a part of like the bigger part at that time was like, well, why do you think? Right. And I think after years of trying to like shift things between us, I think one day I said like, and I was, I think, frustrated at the time. I said, I'd like you to think about that. Why do you think I don't tell you things?
Powerful.
Right. And, you know, I think in the end, maybe we ended up having conversation then or later on. But I was able to articulate, like, you know, when I talk to my friends, like they're supportive. They're open to me sharing. I don't feel that level of support in your words, even though you may feel like you're being supportive. Right. I labeled my parents like dream killers before because I remember being a kid and being so excited to share. And then out of their, I think, loving and protective energy, they would point out the things that could possibly go wrong. And I just felt so deflated, like dream killed again. And I think to help my parents understand that that plays a part in whether I want to continue to share with you.
Yeah, totally.
Right. And then it doesn't surprise me that you see that I share with all sorts of people in my life and not you. And I can see why that might feel hurtful or sad or whatever for you, or maybe even confusing. And I can assure you there's a reason, there's a cause and effect here going on.
Yeah.
Right. So I really enjoy, you know, these last few episodes of looking at, you know, in what way do we place burdens on other people? In what way do we place burdens on ourselves? Maybe we haven't touched on how do we place burdens on other people so much yet. Maybe that's a separate episode and conversation. But we've talked about, you know, what does it feel like to receive someone's burden, carry someone's burden? We're talking today about what it's like to burden ourselves. And are we ready to lift some of those burdens? And these burdens can be very little, or they can be big. They can be really heavy, or just sort of inconvenient and unnecessary. I remember, this was years ago now, I was very familiar with feeling overwhelmed and rushed. And I was like, oh, that's just sort of my life, overwhelmed and rushed. Because I was busy then too. And then after a while, I realized I am burdening myself with labeling this as overwhelm, with rushing when I could really just call them and change the time, or I could like not do every component beforehand and just show up. Like it doesn't need to feel this way. And so I gave myself the practice, the task of telling myself, I feel overwhelmed right now, and I feel like I have to rush. And I'm reminding myself that I don't have to feel overwhelmed right now. I don't have to rush right now. And that, there was a lot of confusion and resistance when I was working with that. Because if we are used to rushing and feeling overwhelmed, you don't think there's a choice. I think it's just a given based on the situation. I really had to learn like how I could tweak some expectations I placed on myself and the shoulds to not feel that way anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, we're talking about feeling spacious and freedom and agency. Important.
Yeah. So my hope is that you do maybe a little inventory of how you might be burdening yourself right now in your life and see if you want to lift some of those burdens. Maybe not all of them, maybe not 100%, but could you tweak something, right? And perhaps you also want to explore what kind of burdens you've placed upon yourself and in the past. And that could be a really beautiful self-compassion practice. of just acknowledging, really burdened myself in the past. And I'm learning to be gentler with myself. I'm learning to allow myself to live a life that includes more spaciousness, more lightness, more freedom, more ease. Because I'm pretty sure that none of the people who really love and care about you want you to walk around every day feeling burdened.
Right. Yeah. And there are so many rolling effects of that, of feeling burdened.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Can I say one last thing?
Yeah, for sure.
This reminds me of, I just had a sad moment here, I don't know how to describe it really, but what flashed in my mind was two people in a relationship doing their thing and both feeling really burdened and nobody speaking up.
Typical.
And what might it be like to set aside some time, make it even a ritual to share? This week I feel burdened by, this month I felt burdened by, right? A burden I've been putting upon myself this week, this month, is this last year, whatever. And just to say it to each other and hear it from each other and notice the emotion that's there. Notice the sensations that come up, whether you're saying them or hearing them. Watching this loved one of yours share what they feel burdened by, burden from the outside and also burden from within. And I'm imagining that these two people would want to help lift some of those off, or remind us that we don't have to sit with these burdens on our own. Some of them maybe don't even need to be burdens.
Yeah.
But what kind of opportunities are we missing out on in relationship, whether it's intimate relationship or friendships or work relationships, when we don't share in that way?
Totally.
Right? What could be different if we start growing a practice of sharing what we feel burdened by?
Yeah. Yeah. The prompt I would suggest people use, because there's no way, it's less tending towards language that can be made blamey, you're burdening me or whatever. Mm-hmm. Something that's weighing on me is. Mm-hmm. So I feel weighed down by, anything. And it's easier, I think, to sort through when you find a word that really resonates with you, and maybe it's burden, maybe it's heaviness, maybe it's lack of freedom, whatever that is. But it shows you how disparate and all-encompassing these can be, because there's so many of these things every day that we just flick by and don't really notice. But if you can notice what's weighing on you, what's feeling heavy, what's feeling like too much to carry.
Too much to carry. The word that came for me is what feels consuming. Yeah. For me right now is what's filling my head right now.
Yes. Yeah. Because it doesn't need to be such a heavy weight that we can't hold it. Any amount of weight that's in contrast to the feeling of freedom and liberation and ease and lightness.
Yeah. And a familiar word, I think something I feel worried about right now is.
Yeah.
Right. And if you tend to feel anxious or describe yourself as an anxious person, this will be an interesting practice to do, is to shift away from ending the sentence there with I feel anxious, or I am anxious, or I'm an anxious person, or I have anxiety right now, by elaborating more. What are you feeling worried about? What is consuming you? What is filling your head? There's always something there, but it's the something there that gives us and the other person so much more information. We can do something with that. Yeah. Right? When we stop the sentence at I'm feeling anxious, what are we supposed to do with that?
Yeah. Where to go? Totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll have to stop us from talking now because we have limited time today.
Okay.
Do you have a body connection practice that feels good for right now?
See, the thing with body connection practices, and like, I don't know, we're in episode 90 something at this point. And I think for the most part, every episode has begun and end with a body practice that's different. Maybe we've repeated here and there, but we've given a lot. The thing is, there's so many more that we do in our groups, so many more that are sort of a bit tough to describe just with words through a podcast. And so I'm like, oh, I wish I could share that one, or like that one would be so fun. But there's just a different setting that fits that kind of body connection practice better. So I'm trying to pull from what would feel good just right now in a podcast form. Yes. Okay. I found one. Let's go with, how would you describe this? Like giving ourselves a hug?
Yeah.
Right? But I'm going to trick you because we're not staying here, or like you have the option of not staying here. Let's say that. Open up the arms and then come back to hugging. And you can open up and notice what else wants to happen. Like when I open up, I want to turn my palms so they face up. I want to lift my chin. That's my natural, like when I open up. And then when I come back to hug, I want to drop my head. I want to pause there. And you might want something totally different. Or you might notice, I don't want to open up. Or I'm quite happy staying in opened up. So there's something nice about just opening, closing. There's also something nice about noticing, like only opening and closing when you feel the pull to from your body. Right? So see how that feels. And even notice the difference. What's it like if we just said, hey, open your arms, close your arms, open your arms, close your arms? Like there's a, a feeling that comes with that.
Mm-hmm.
And then what does it feel like where there's no one else dictating the pace? What happens when there's no one else dictating the pace? What do you do with that? Do you go autopilot and just don't think about it and just do something? Do you move at a pace that you think you should move at? You think someone else would want you to move at? What is it like to hang out and like stay closed in until your body says, now I would like to open? Stay open until your body says, now I would like to close. So that's just different ways of playing.
Beautiful. Thank you, Gigi.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything else you'd like to say before we sign off?
No, thank you.
All right. Very polite. Thank you. Very good. You're welcome. Okay. Well, thank you guys for being here. As always, please do like, follow, and subscribe. And if anything we've said here today has been helpful for you, please share with somebody that you care about. We'll see you next time.
Bye.